A cook, a rebellious heir, and a butler with secrets. Where rules can be broken and truths change destinies. This story is just beginning. Don't miss any details. Subscribe now to the channel and follow every twist. The aroma of fresh spices filled the kitchen of the Blackwood estate, one of the most imposing mansions in Westbrook, a mountainous region of Virginia. Among copper pots and gleaming utensils, Rachel Oliveira, 38, moved with the precision of a ballerina. With her slightly sweaty forehead and black hair tied in a firm bun, she was finishing the final details of the dinner that would be served to the family that night. Although she worked in the shadows of the imposing mansion, her culinary talent was recognized as one of the treasures of the house. "Mommy, look what I drew." The childish voice of Noah, her 7-year-old son, echoed through the kitchen as he proudly held up a colorful paper. "How beautiful, my love," Rachel smiled, wiping her hands on her apron before bending down to hug him. "But remember what we agreed? You need to stay in the back room when I'm preparing dinner for the employers." "But it's boring there. Can I stay just a little longer?" The boy's almond-shaped eyes, identical to hers, pleaded. Rachel sighed. "Just until I finish this dessert, okay? Then we need to go back to our little corner." The Blackwood estate wasn't just a residence. It was a symbol of power and tradition. Built during the Civil War era, it maintained its aristocratic aura, even in the 21st century. Its owner, businessman Richard Blackwood, descendant of an influential Cole family, maintained rigid protocols that resembled the time when his ancestors socialized with the elite. While organizing the small ramekins of pudding, Rachel heard footsteps approaching. They were too light to belong to William Pierce, the head butler, whose firm steps always announced his arrival. "What is that you're making?" The curious voice made Rachel and Noah turn simultaneously. Standing at the kitchen door was Ethan Blackwood, Richard's youngest son, a 22-year-old young man with restless eyes and a smile that rarely appeared at formal dinners. "Mr. Ethan!" Rachel straightened up quickly, trying to position herself between the young man and her son. "I'm finishing the dessert for dinner. It will be served in 30 minutes. But Ethan wasn't looking at the puddings. His eyes were fixed on the boy, who, curious, observed him without the fear that the staff normally showed. "And who are you, little one?" Ethan asked, approaching Noah. "I'm Noah," the boy responded with childlike spontaneity. "My mom makes the most delicious food in the world." "Noah, please," Rachel intervened, nervous. "Excuse yourself to Mr. Ethan and go to the back room, okay?" "But is this your drawing?" Ethan had already taken the paper from the boy's hands and was examining it with genuine interest. "You draw very well for your age." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. The Blackwood estate rules were clear. Staff should not bring family members to the workplace. But as a single mother with Noah's school under renovation for 2 weeks, she had no alternative but to bring him with her, keeping him hidden in the small staff break room. "Mr. Ethan, I apologize," she began, choosing her words. "It's a temporary situation just until his school reopens. I promise he doesn't disrupt the functioning of the house." To her surprise, Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that he rarely displayed in the mansion's formalities. "No need to apologize, Rachel. Actually, I was thinking about how this house is too big and too empty." He returned the drawing to Noah. "Do you like storybooks, Noah? I have an entire library upstairs full of books I read when I was your age." The boy's eyes lit up. "I love stories. My mom tells me one every night." "Ethan, the guests are arriving." The cutting voice of William Pierce, the head butler, broke the moment. Tall, always impeccable in his dark uniform, he cast a disapproving look at the scene he found. His grey eyes, cold as steel, fell first on Noah, then on Rachel, before fixing on Ethan. "Your father requests your presence in the main hall immediately," continued the butler, his voice not hiding his displeasure at seeing the cook's son there. "I'm coming, William," Ethan replied, unhurried. Before leaving, he turned to Noah. "Tomorrow I'll show you those books, deal?" When Ethan left, William's smile disappeared completely. He partially closed the kitchen door and approached Rachel with measured steps. "You know the rules, Rachel." His voice was low, almost a threatening whisper. "No family members on the Blackwood estate premises, especially interacting with the family." Rachel swallowed hard. It's an exceptional situation, William. His school is under renovation, and I have no one to leave him with. Exceptional would be if you still had your job after tonight, he retorted, adjusting his shirt cuffs. I've worked for the Blackwood family for 20 years, ensuring that the traditions and rules of this house are respected. I won't allow a cook and her son to disrespect all that. Please, William, Rachel implored, lowering her voice so that Noah, now distracted with his drawing, wouldn't hear. It's just for a few more days. I've worked here. For 3 years, there's never been any complaint about my service. The butler looked at her with a calculating gaze. 3 years are nothing compared to 2 decades of loyalty, my dear. I have plans for my position in this house, and I won't allow interference. He paused, observing the perfectly aligned puddings. And as for young Mr. Ethan, he has responsibilities to the family and the company. Distractions are not welcome. Before Rachel could respond, William turned around and left, not without adding, I'll be watching you. One wrong step, and there will be no second chance. When the door closed, Rachel felt her legs weaken. She leaned on the counter, breathing deeply. Looking at Noah, who was still absorbed in his drawing, a feeling of vulnerability invaded her. That job was all she had to support her son. Losing her position at the Blackwood estate would mean starting over from scratch once again. Dinner was served promptly at 8, as tradition dictated. While the dishes circulated among the distinguished guests, Rachel remained in the kitchen, coordinating each step. Noah slept curled up on a small sofa in the staff room, exhausted after the long day. What Rachel didn't notice was Ethan's attentive gaze throughout dinner. While his father discoursed on business and politics, the young Blackwood heir seemed distant, as if his thoughts were in the kitchen with the cook and her son. She also didn't notice when, after dessert was served, William Pierce leaned over to whisper something in Richard Blackwood's ear, whose face immediately closed in a severe expression. The night would end with a discovery that would forever change. The dynamics of the Blackwood estate, placing Rachel at the center of a plot she never imagined facing. The next morning dawned with a typical mountain mist enveloping the Blackwood estate. Rachel awoke before the alarm, with that restlessness that only mothers know. Noah slept deeply beside her, in the small bed of the service room at the back of the property. Observing her sleeping son, she thought about the encounter the night before and William Pierce's veiled threat. 3 soft knocks on the door interrupted her thoughts. Upon opening it, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Winters, the oldest housekeeper of the house, a 70-year-old woman who knew every secret of those walls. "Good morning, dear. I came to tell you that Mr. Richard wants to see you in his office now." Mrs. Winters' voice was gentle, but her eyes conveyed concern. "Me? So early?" Rachel's heart accelerated. "It's about Noah, isn't it?" The elderly woman sighed. "William spent the whole night in the office with the boss. He only left this morning." Rachel felt her blood freeze. "Mrs. Winters, could you stay with Noah while I'm there? He's still sleeping." "Of course, dear, go, but remember, firmness in your gaze. The Blackwoods respect those who stand their ground." Wearing her impeccably pressed uniform, Rachel crossed the ornate corridors of the mansion. Each step echoed on the marble floor while her stomach twisted with anxiety. Upon reaching the imposing carved wooden door, she took a deep breath before knocking. "Enter." Richard Blackwood's grave voice sounded from within. The office was a monument to tradition, mahogany bookshelves crammed with books, a century-old crystal chandelier, and at the center, a massive desk where Richard, a 60-year-old man with graying hair and aristocratic posture, waited. At his side, standing like a sentinel, was William, with an almost imperceptible smile of satisfaction on his thin lips. Rachel. Richard did not offer for her to sit. "William has informed me about an irregular situation occurring in my house." "Mr. Richard, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," he interrupted coldly. "The rules of the estate are clear from the day you were hired. No family members on the premises, especially interacting with my son." Rachel took a deep breath, remembering Mrs. Winters' words, firmness in her gaze. "Sir, I am a single mother. My son's school is temporarily under renovation. I have no one to leave him with and I need to work to support him. I promise he doesn't interfere in anything. He stays quietly in the staff room." "That's not what I witnessed yesterday," William intervened. "The boy was in the main kitchen, distracting you from your duties and worse, interacting with Mr. Ethan." Richard adjusted his glasses, observing her intensely. "Rachel, I recognize your talent in the kitchen. Your dishes are praised by all guests, but principles are not negotiable in this house." The silence weighed for a few seconds before Richard continued. "However, my son Ethan came to me this morning." This caught Rachel by surprise. She noticed a slight contraction in William's face. "Ethan rarely takes interest in the affairs of the house," Richard continued. "But today, for the first time in a long time, he sought me out to defend someone. He defended you and your son." William interrupted, clearly displeased. "Mr. Richard, with all due respect, the young sir doesn't understand the traditions that sustain this family. He is being manipulated by—" "Silence, William." Richard's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Ethan may be young, but he is a Blackwood, and he made me see something I've been ignoring. Times have changed." Richard rose, walking to the window that offered a privileged view of the Blackwood estate gardens. "Rachel, your son may remain temporarily until his school reopens, but with strict conditions. He will stay in the old study room near the A library, where he can have his books and toys, and you may visit him during your work breaks." Rachel could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he answered dryly. "This is an exception, not a permanent change. And William," he turned to the visibly displeased butler, "you will supervise this arrangement to ensure it doesn't interfere with the functioning of the house." The butler adjusted his posture, hiding his indignation beneath a mask of professionalism. "As you wish, sir." When Rachel left the office, her legs trembled with relief. In the hallway, to her surprise, she found Ethan waiting, leaning against a column with his hands in his pants pockets. "Looks like everything worked out," he commented with a half-smile. "Was it you? You spoke with your father?" Ethan shrugged. "I just suggested that perhaps some traditions deserve to be reconsidered. Besides," he added, approaching, "I promised Noah I would show him the books in the library, remember?" That same day, Ethan kept his promise. The old study room, a sunny room overlooking the gardens, was prepared for Noah. Shelves were filled with children's books, and a small table was installed for the boys' drawings. "Look, Mum, there's even a big board for me to draw on," exclaimed Noah, marveling at the blackboard that Ethan had ordered to be placed. Rachel observed the scene with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Ethan, this is too much. I don't know how to repay you." "Repay me by preparing that wonderful pudding more often," he joked. Then, more seriously, "This house has always been too cold. A little childhood life will do everyone good." In the days that followed, an unusual routine was established at the estate. Noah spent the mornings in the study room, where he sometimes received visits from Ethan, who told him stories or taught him board games. In her spare hours, Rachel went to check on him, always careful not to neglect her obligations in the kitchen. What she didn't notice was William Pierce's vigilant gaze, observing every movement of this new dynamic with growing resentment. The butler, who for 2 decades had maintained absolute control over the estate's routine, saw his influence threatened not only by Noah's presence, but especially by the sudden change in Ethan. On a particularly hot afternoon, while preparing the week's menu, Rachel was surprised by Ethan in the kitchen. "Rachel, I need to confess something," he began, sitting on one of the high stools. "Before you and Noah, I barely spent time in this house. I always fled from business, meetings, from my father's expectations, but now, she encouraged him while chopping vegetables. "Now I realize that perhaps I have a purpose here. Not necessarily following in my father's footsteps, but perhaps transforming this place." He paused. "Do you know why William is so rigid with the rules?" Rachel shook her head negatively. "My father promised him years ago that when he retired, William would be promoted to general administrator of the estate and all Blackwood businesses. A position of extraordinary power and prestige. And will that happen soon? That was the plan, but since I returned from Europe, I've been questioning many things about how our family conducts business, and that includes this promotion. The conversation was interrupted by William himself, who entered the kitchen with his usual rigid posture. "Mr. Ethan, your father requests your presence for a video conference with investors from New York," he announced, casting a cold look at Rachel. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. "The investors are already on the line, sir," Ethan sighed, getting up. "We'll continue this conversation later, Rachel." When Ethan left, William remained for a few seconds, his calculating gaze fixed on the cook. "You're playing a dangerous game, Rachel," he finally said. "Getting close to the family won't change your position in this house." "I'm not playing any game, William. Just doing my job and taking care of my son." The butler approached, lowering his voice. "I know exactly what you're doing. I've seen many like you pass through this house, thinking they could change things. Do you know what happened to all of them? They disappeared without a trace." Before Rachel could respond, Mrs. Winters entered the kitchen carrying a basket of fresh fruits. "William, Mr. Richard is asking for you," informed the housekeeper, casting a meaningful look at Rachel. The butler adjusted his tie. "This conversation isn't over," he murmured to Rachel before leaving. "Be careful, dear," warned Mrs. Winters when they were alone. "William Pierce isn't someone you should underestimate. He built his position in this house by eliminating anyone he considered a threat." "But I just want to do my job in peace," protested Rachel. "I'm not threatening anyone." The elderly woman smiled sadly. "But young Ethan is changing because of you, and that for William is the greatest threat of all." That night, while tucking Noah into bed, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was forming around her, something she didn't yet fully understand. "Mom, Uncle Ethan said he's going to take me to see the greenhouses on the weekend," murmured Noah sleepily. "He said there are flowers that change color." Rachel stroked her son's hair, feeling a tightness in her chest. "That's great, my love. But remember that soon your school will reopen and we'll return to our normal routine." "But I don't want to leave here," protested the boy. "I like Uncle Ethan." As she watched her son fall asleep, Rachel wondered if it would be possible to return to the life they had before, and more importantly, if that was what she really wanted. Noah's first 2 weeks at the Blackwood estate transformed not only the routine of the house, but also Ethan's behavior. The young heir, previously absent and disinterested in the family business, now participated in meetings, gave opinions on investments, and, to Richard's surprise, demonstrated an acumen that no one imagined he possessed. "The change in Ethan is impressive," commented Richard during breakfast with his wife, Charlotte, an elegant 58-year-old woman who divided her time between social works and maintaining the family's status in high Westbrook society. "Perhaps he's finally maturing," she replied, adjusting her impeccable posture. "Or perhaps there are other reasons for his sudden interest in the house." Richard raised his eyes from the newspaper. "What are you insinuating, Charlotte?" "Nothing, dear. Just observing that our son has been spending a lot of time with the cook and her son. It was an exceptional situation that I temporarily authorized," explained Richard. "The boys' school reopens next week." Charlotte took a sip of tea before adding, "William sought me out yesterday. He's concerned about the influence this woman might be exerting over Ethan." "William should be concerned with his own duties," retorted Richard, somewhat irritated. "Besides, Ethan is a Blackwood. No one influences him against his will." At that same moment, in the back gardens, far from the employer's eyes, William Pierce walked with determined steps toward the house of Jack, the head gardener. A simple man, of Southern origin, who had worked at the estate for almost as long as the butler himself. "Good morning, Jack," greeted William with false cordiality. "I need to talk about a delicate matter." Jack, a man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, rose from the flower bed where he was planting begonias. "Yes, Mr. William?" "It's about the cook, Rachel. Have you noticed how she has been getting close to young Ethan?" The gardener shrugged. "Everyone minds their own business, Mr. William. The lady is just doing her job." "Her job is in the kitchen, not seducing the Blackwood heir," hissed the butler, momentarily abandoning his mask of politeness. Regaining his composure, he continued. Jack, we've been in this house for decades. We know the traditions, the rules. People like us must stay in our places for everything to function properly. What do you want from me, after all? Asked Jack, suspicious. William lowered his voice. Just for you to be alert. Observe their meetings, the subjects they discuss. If you notice anything inappropriate, come directly to me. You want me to spy on the lady? With all due respect, Mr. William, I don't do that kind of thing. The butler's face hardened. Jack, do you remember when your daughter needed that expensive surgery? Who convinced Mrs. Charlotte to pay for everything? And when your grandson needed that special school in Charlottesville, who arranged the scholarship? Jack lowered his eyes, embarrassed. I know I owe you a lot. It's not a question of owing, my friend. It's a question of loyalty, of protecting this house and its values. William placed his hand on the gardener's shoulder. Think about it. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rachel prepared cornbread with guava, a recipe she had learned from her grandmother in the interior of her home country. Noah was drawing sitting at the table, concentrating on coloring a castle that looked a lot like the Blackwood estate. Rachel? Ethan's voice surprised her. He entered the kitchen carrying a thick folder. I have news. Good morning, Ethan, she smiled, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach that she felt whenever he appeared unexpectedly. What news? Is that Uncle Ethan? Noah exclaimed, running to hug him. In the last few days, the boy had developed a huge admiration for the young heir, who always brought new books or interesting stories. Ethan affectionately messed up the boy's hair before extending the folder to Rachel. These are application forms for Westbrook Integrated School, one of the best in the region. Confused, Rachel opened the folder. I don't understand. It's a full scholarship for Noah, explained Ethan, excited. They have a program for talented children, and when I showed his drawings to the principal, a family friend, she was impressed. Rachel felt her heart race, divided between gratitude and concern. Ethan, I can't accept this, it's too much. Why? Noah deserves a quality education, and you work hard every day. It's not that simple, she hesitated, lowering her voice so her son wouldn't hear. People are already commenting on our friendship. This will only make things worse. Ethan frowned. What people? William? Before she could answer, Mrs. Winters entered hurriedly into the kitchen. Rachel, something's wrong in the pantry, announced the housekeeper, visibly disturbed. Half of the ingredients you requested for the charity dinner have disappeared. What do you mean disappeared? Rachel placed the folder on the table, alarmed. I checked everything myself last night. Come see with your own eyes. In the ICU main pantry, Rachel confirmed with horror that the most expensive and exclusive ingredients she had selected for the charity dinner, which would take place that night to raise funds for a children's hospital, had vanished. Her imported saffron black truffles, special fillets, all gone. This is impossible, she murmured, checking each shelf. No one besides me and William has the key to this pantry. And speaking of the devil, whispered Mrs. Winters, indicating, with her eyes, the arrival of the butler, who appeared at the door accompanied by Charlotte Blackwood. Mrs. Charlotte, Rachel greeted, trying to maintain her composure despite the growing panic. We have a problem. The ingredients for the dinner. Yes, William just informed me, interrupted Charlotte, her glacial tone. More than $5,000 in imported products simply disappeared under your supervision. I swear they were all here last night, Rachel defended herself. Someone must have entered during the night. William stepped forward, his face a mask of false concern. Mrs. Charlotte, as I explained, only Rachel and I have the keys, and I was in the security room all night, supervising the installation of the new alarm system. What are you insinuating, William? Asked Ethan, who had followed the group to the pantry. I'm not insinuating anything, Mr. Ethan, replied the butler with false humility, just presenting the facts. The expensive ingredients disappeared, and only 2 people have access to this pantry. Charlotte crossed her arms, her severe gaze fixed on Rachel. The charity dinner is tonight. 150 distinguished guests, including the mayor and the Secretary of Culture. A crucial opportunity for the Children's Hospital to get the necessary resources. "Mrs. Charlotte, I can improvise an alternative menu," offered Rachel, desperate. "I have contacts at the Central Market who can deliver fresh ingredients in a few hours." "It's not just a matter of food," retorted Charlotte. "It's a matter of trust. How can I trust the organization of such important events to someone who can't even ensure the safety of the supplies?" Ethan intervened. "Mother, that's unfair. Clearly someone is trying to harm Rachel." "And who would have an interest in that?" questioned Charlotte, arching a perfect eyebrow. A heavy silence fell over the group. Rachel felt all eyes on her, while her mind tried to process what was happening. It wasn't a coincidence that this occurred precisely when her closeness to Ethan was beginning to draw attention. "Mrs. Charlotte," Mrs. Winters finally spoke, her elderly but firm voice. "I've worked in this house for more than 40 years. I've known you since you were a girl, and I know how to recognize when something isn't right. Rachel is too dedicated to make a mistake like this." Charlotte sighed, massaging her temples. "Winters, your loyalty is admirable, but we have a real problem here." Turning to William, she ordered, "Check the security camera. Recordings." "Unfortunately, ma'am, the cameras in this area were deactivated last night due to system maintenance," promptly replied the butler, as if he had been expecting the question. "How convenient," murmured Ethan, looking directly at Ye. "William." "Well," Charlotte concluded, "we don't have time for investigations now. The event is in 6 hours. William, use the family card and go personally to the Gourmet Emporium in Charlottesville to get everything necessary. Rachel," she turned to the cook, "I hope you can prepare everything in time." "Yes, ma'am," nodded Rachel, feeling her stomach churn with anxiety. When Charlotte and William left, Ethan waited until they were out of earshot to speak. This was clearly a setup. "I know," agreed Rachel, leaning on a shelf. "But why?" Mrs. Winters approached, speaking in a low voice. "Because you've become a threat, dear. William is in the final phase of his plan. Richard should announce his retirement soon, and William would take over all the family business. But what does that have to do with me?" "Ethan began to take an interest in the business because of you," explained the elderly woman. "And if he decides to take control when his father retires, William would lose everything," completed Ethan, his face hardening with understanding. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just her job at stake. It was something much bigger. "What do we do now?" she asked, worried. "First, we save the charity dinner," replied Ethan determinedly. "Then we find out how William got the ingredients and why the cameras were conveniently turned off." While Ethan left to check the security system, Rachel ran to the kitchen, where she found Noah still drawing, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Mom, is everything okay? You look worried," observed the perceptive boy. Rachel forced a smile. "Everything's fine, my love. Just a small problem that we're going to solve." The following hours were of intense work. As soon as William returned with the ingredients, Rachel and her team of assistants dived into preparing dinner. Despite the circumstances, she was determined not to give the butler the satisfaction of seeing her fail. What she didn't know was that while she coordinated the preparation of the main dishes, Ethan was discreetly searching the service area, looking for answers. And it was in the seasonal workers' lodging, in a small, rarely used dependency, that he made a surprising discovery. Hidden under an old canvas were all the missing ingredients. The charity dinner, despite the setback, was a success. The guests repeatedly praised the exceptional creativity and flavor of the menu, and the children's hospital managed to raise more than expected. Richard, impressed with Rachel's ability to overcome the crisis, made a point of calling her to the main hall for a public thank you, to William's visible displeasure. Later that night, when the mansion finally quieted, Ethan sought out Rachel in the kitchen, where she was finishing the cleanup. "I found the ingredients," he announced, showing photos on his phone. "They were hidden in the temporary workers' lodging. But who would do this, and how did they get my key?" Before Ethan could answer, a noise caught both their attention. At the kitchen door, pale and visibly nervous, stood Jack, the gardener. "I need to talk to you," he said, anxiously looking over his shoulder to ensure no one had followed him, "about William and what he's planning to do." The kitchen of the Blackwood estate, normally a space of creation and aromas, transformed that night into a room of conspiracies. Jack, with trembling hands and a frightened look, sat at the preparation table while Rachel served a strong tea to calm him. Ethan remained standing, arms crossed, carefully observing the gardener. "Speak, Jack. What do you know about William?" encouraged Ethan. The gardener took a long sip of tea before answering. "Saatuya, Mr. Ethan, I've worked for your family for more than 25 years. I've never gotten into trouble, always did my job right." He paused, as if seeking courage. "But what William has been doing, it isn't right." "It was he who stole the ingredients, wasn't it?" asked Rachel. Jack slowly nodded. "He asked me to help, said it was just to give a scare, teach a lesson. I didn't want to, I swear to God I didn't. But he what, Jack?" pressed Ethan. "He has information about everyone who works here," confessed the gardener, lowering his voice. "He knows where to press to get what he wants. In my case," his voice failed, "my daughter, the one who had the expensive surgery that Mrs. Charlotte paid for. William threatened to cause problems for her at the hospital where she works." Rachel sat down, shocked. "He blackmailed you?" "Not just me. William has a file on every employee. He knows secrets, weaknesses, needs. That's how he's maintained control of everything for so many years." Ethan hit the table with his fist, making the utensils clink. "This is unacceptable. Why did you never speak to me or my father?" Jack shrugged. "With all due respect, Mr. Ethan, until recently you barely showed up around here. And your father, well, he blindly trusts William. 20 years of service created a loyalty that nothing seems to shake." "What else is he planning, Jack?" inquired Rachel, feeling a chill of apprehension. The gardener nervously looked at the door before continuing. "He wasn't satisfied with the failure of the ingredients plan. Last night, after everyone went to sleep, I heard him talking with the driver, Ted. They're planning something bigger." "What kind of thing?" Ethan's voice had a somber tone. "An accusation of theft. William plans to hide some of Mrs. Charlotte's antique jewelry in Rachel's room, then find them during a supposed routine search." Rachel felt her blood freeze. "My God, he wants to frame me for a crime I didn't commit." "Why now?" questioned Ethan. "Why this sudden obsession with harming Rachel?" Jack hesitated, looking significantly at both. "Because he sees what's happening between you, the closeness, the friendship, and that threatens everything he's built." Turning to Rachel, he added, "He told Ted that no little cook is going to mess up his plans for the future of the Blackwoods." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Ethan walked to the window, observing the night gardens of the estate while processing the information. "When does he intend to do this?" he finally asked. "Tomorrow during lunch. Mrs. Charlotte will be home and Mr. Richard in a meeting in town. The perfect moment to create a scene and convince your mother of Rachel's guilt." Ethan turned to them, his eyes shining with determination. "Then we have until tomorrow to stop him, and for that we need evidence. Evidence of his manipulations and blackmail." "The file," remembered Rachel. "Jack said he keeps information on all employees. If we could find that file." "He keeps everything in his personal office, that small room near the main quarters," informed Jack, "locked up tight." "That won't be a problem," affirmed Ethan with a half smile. "I grew up exploring every inch of this house. I know passages that not even my father remembers exist." Rachel hesitated. "Ethan, we can't simply invade William's office. If we're caught, he'll have even more reason to harm us." "And if we wait, you'll be accused of theft," he retorted. "Do you prefer to take that risk?" At that moment, the kitchen door opened softly, making the three of them startle. To their relief, it was only Mrs. Winters. "Sorry to interrupt," said the elderly housekeeper, closing the door behind her. "But I heard part of your conversation." "Mrs. Winters," began Rachel, concerned. The housekeeper raised her hand, interrupting her. "Child, I've worked almost a lifetime in this house. I saw Richard grow up. I saw this boy born," she pointed to Ethan. "And I also saw William Pierce build his little empire of fear and manipulation." She approached, leaning on her cane. "If you're going to confront that viper, you're going to need help." Ethan smiled, surprised by the elderly woman's firmness. And you want to help us, Mrs. Winters. I want more than that, she affirmed, determined. I want to see William Pierce finally exposed for what he really is, and I have something that can help. From inside her apron pocket, she removed a small golden key. Master key. As housekeeper, I have access to almost all rooms, including William's office. Rachel looked at Ethan, who subtly nodded. It was a chance they couldn't waste. All right, agreed Rachel. But what about Noah? I don't want him to be in danger. I can ask my daughter to pick him up tomorrow morning, offered Jack. She can take him to spend the day with my grandchildren in Charlottesville. He'll be safe there. Over the next hour, they elaborated a detailed plan. Jack would pretend to perform maintenance on the irrigation system near the windows of William's office, creating a distraction. Mrs. Winters would use the master key to give Ethan access, who would enter to search for the blackmail file. Meanwhile, Rachel would maintain her normal routine in the kitchen to not raise suspicions. After Jack and Mrs. Winters left, Ethan and Rachel remained in the kitchen, the tension between them palpable. "Thank you," she finally said, breaking the silence, "for believing in me, for helping me." Ethan approached, sitting beside her. "You know, Rachel, before you and Noah appeared, I was completely lost. I spent years running from responsibilities, from the pressure of being a Blackwood." He smiled, a genuine smile that he rarely displayed in the formalities of the estate. "You showed me that I can make a difference, that I can use my name and position for something that really matters." Rachel felt her heart race with his proximity. "Ethan, No, he gently interrupted. "Don't say anything now. First, let's resolve this situation. After..." He left the sentence unfinished. What would come after hanging in the air between them like a promise? The next morning, Noah left early with Jack's daughter, believing he would spend a fun day playing with other children. Rachel hugged him with extra strength, trying to hide the worry that consumed her. "Be good, my love," she recommended, adjusting the small backpack on her son's back. "Mommy will pick you up later." "Okay, Mom," replied the boy, excited about the outing. "I'll make a really nice drawing for you and Uncle Ethan." When the car departed, Rachel took a deep breath and returned to the kitchen. The clock pointed to 9:30. They had approximately 3 hours until Richard left for his meeting in town, the moment when William planned to execute his setup. At 10:45, as agreed, Jack began work on the irrigation pumps near William's office. The noise and movement soon attracted the butler's attention, who came out to check what was happening. "What's all this noise about, Jack?" demanded William, irritated. "Problems with the irrigation system, Mr. William," explained the gardener. "Pretending difficulty with the tools. The main pump is faulty. I need to test all the connections. And this couldn't wait until after lunch?" "Mr. Richards' orders, before he leaves. Said he doesn't want problems with the rare orchids that arrived yesterday." While William was distracted with Jack, Mrs. Winters discreetly guided Ethan to the door of the butler's private office. With hands slightly trembling from age, she inserted the master key. "You have at most 10 minutes," she whispered. "I'll stay in the corridor watching." Ethan entered silently into the office. The environment was meticulously organized, with an antique desk, bookshelves, and a small safe embedded in the wall. He began to search quickly, opening drawers, checking files, always careful to leave everything exactly as he found it. In the third drawer, protected by a secondary lock that he had to force, he found a black leather folder with the initials WP engraved. Inside, exactly as Jack had described, were detailed dossiers on each employee of the estate. Personal information, family secrets, financial needs, small slip-ups, everything meticulously documented and ready to be used as a manipulation tool. But what really caught his attention was a separate envelope, marked as Succession Project. Upon opening it, Ethan discovered something that made his blood freeze: a detailed plan to gradually take control of all Blackwood businesses after Richard's retirement, including falsified documents with his father's signature, transferring powers of attorney and administrative powers to William. With his heart racing, Ethan quickly photographed each page with his cell phone. When he was about to replace the documents in the drawer, he heard voices approaching in the corridor. William's grave and distinctive voice was unmistakable. "I'm sure I heard a noise coming from my office," he was saying, his voice approaching. Ethan quickly replaced the documents in the drawer, closing it as silently as possible. He looked around, desperate for a hiding place. The office didn't offer many options, just a cabinet too small for an adult and the space under the desk, partially covered by a wooden panel. The doorknob began to turn. In a quick and silent movement, Ethan squeezed into the space behind a heavy curtain, praying that the volume of his body would not be perceptible through the fabric. William entered, followed by an apprehensive Mrs. Winters. "I assure you, William, there's no one here," insisted the housekeeper. "It must have been the wind or some noise coming from the garden." The butler surveyed the office with suspicious eyes. "Perhaps," he murmured, not entirely convinced. He approached the desk, looking directly at the drawer that Ethan had just rummaged through. For a terrible moment it seemed he would open it and discover the forced lock. But at that instant, a crash coming from the garden diverted his attention. Jack had accidentally dropped several tools, creating a perfect distraction. "What is that incompetent gardener doing now?" William irritated, moving to the window. Taking advantage of the moment, Mrs. Winters coughed loudly, a prearranged signal. Ethan understood the cue and, when William was looking out the window with his back turned, silently slid from his hiding place and left through the door that the housekeeper kept ajar. In the corridor, as they hurriedly moved away, Ethan squeezed Mrs. Winters' wrinkled hand in silent gratitude. They had obtained the evidence they needed. Now they needed to act before William executed his plan against Rachel. The clock in the main room of the Blackwood estate marked 11:45 when Richard Blackwood, impeccably dressed in his grey suit, prepared to leave for his meeting in town. Ethan intercepted him in the entrance hall, trying to disguise his accelerated breathing after escaping from William's office. "Dad, I need to talk to you," said Ethan, subtly blocking the way. Richard consulted his wristwatch, impatient. "Can it be later? I'm late for a meeting with investors." "It's about William Pierce." The butler's name captured Richard's attention, who frowned. "What about him?" Ethan hesitated, aware that they were in an open area of the house where any employee could hear. "Can we talk in your office, just 5 minutes?" Something in his son's seriousness made Richard nod. In the private office, Ethan showed the photos he had taken of William's documents, quickly explaining about the plan to incriminate Rachel and the blackmail against the employees. "This is absurd," reacted Richard, incredulous. "William has been my right hand for 20 years. Why would he do something like this?" "Because he wants more, Dad, much more." Ethan slid his finger on the phone screen, showing the photos of the Succession Project documents. "He's planning to take control of the family business when you retire. He's already prepared documents, some with your forged signature." Richard paled, taking the phone to examine more closely. As he went through the images, his face transformed from incredulity to contained fury. "Where did you get this?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I entered his office." "You what?" Richard raised his voice but soon controlled himself. "That's invasion of privacy, Ethan. If William discovers—" "Dad, he's planning to plant Mom's jewelry in Rachel's room today during lunch to accuse her of theft," interrupted Ethan. "We had no choice." Richard leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his graying hair. The internal struggle between decades of loyalty to William and the incontestable evidence before him was visible. "Who else knows about this?" "Mrs. Winters and Jack helped me. And Rachel, of course, since she's the target." Richard was silent, for long seconds processing the information. Finally, he picked up the phone on the desk. "Cancel my meeting," he ordered his secretary. "Say I had a family emergency." Then, turning to Ethan, "I want you to tell me everything from the beginning." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rachel worked on lunch with nerves on edge. Each time she heard footsteps approaching, her heart raced, fearing it was William executing his plan. At 12:15, when most of the staff was already having lunch, the kitchen door opened. It was Charlotte Blackwood. "Mrs. Charlotte," greeted Rachel, surprised by the unusual visit. "Can I help you with something?" Charlotte advanced with her characteristic elegance, observing the lunch preparations. Just checking the details of tomorrow's dinner. We'll have the ambassador and his wife with us. Something in Charlotte's too casual tone alerted Rachel. Rarely did the lady of the house come personally to the kitchen to address matters she normally delegated to William. "I've already begun the preparations," replied Rachel, maintaining her composure. "I'll make that salmon with passion fruit, sauce that Mr. Richard appreciates so much." Charlotte nodded distractedly, walking through the kitchen as if evaluating the environment. "Rachel, you've been an excellent addition to our team. William frequently comments on your professionalism." The mention of the butler made Rachel's stomach turn. "Thank you, Ma'am." At that moment, as in a carefully choreographed scene, William appeared at the kitchen door. His face showed no emotion, but Rachel noticed a different gleam in his eyes. It was the satisfaction of a predator about to attack its prey. "Mrs. Charlotte, excuse the interruption," he said with false deference, "but I believe we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." "What situation, William?" asked Charlotte, in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer. "It's about your antique jewelry, those kept in the safe in the master bedroom." He made a dramatic pause. "I noticed that the safe was recently opened and..." His eyes slid to Rachel. "Perhaps we should check the employees' quarters." Charlotte raised her eyebrows. "Are you suggesting a theft, William?" "I'm just looking. After the family's interests, as I've always done," he replied smoothly. Rachel felt her legs weaken. It was exactly as Jack had warned. The trap was being set. She looked at the door, calculating her chances of escaping, but knew it would be futile. If she ran, she would only confirm a guilt she didn't have. "In that case," declared Charlotte, "I think we should check my safe first, don't you think?" The suggestion seemed to momentarily destabilize William. "Ma'am, I don't believe that's necessary. I've already confirmed that..." "I insist, William," interrupted Charlotte with unusual firmness. "Let's all check the safe now." The butler hesitated, his usual control momentarily shaken. "As you wish, ma'am." In the corridor, on the way to the master bedroom, they encountered Richard and Ethan coming from the opposite direction. "Charlotte, William," Richard greeted with unusual coldness. "Exactly the people we were looking for." "Richard, I thought you were at your meeting," commented Charlotte, surprised. "I cancelled it. More urgent matters arose here." Richard's gaze met William's, who maintained a neutral expression, although an attentive observer might notice a slight tension in his shoulders. "We were just going to check my safe," explained Charlotte. "William suspects that some jewelry may have been misplaced." "What a coincidence," said Richard in a controlled tone. "I would also like to check something. My office in 5 minutes, William. Charlotte, Ethan, Rachel, all of you too." "Mr. Richard, with all due respect, I believe we should first check the cook's room," insisted William, realizing that his plans were deviating from the expected course. Richard approached, lowering his voice. "That wasn't a request, William. It was an order." The group headed to the main office in tense silence. Rachel walked a few steps behind, still uncertain about what was happening. Ethan slowed his pace, approaching her. "We showed the evidence to my father," he whispered. "He saw everything." These words brought momentary relief, but Rachel knew they were far from a safe resolution. William Pierce wasn't someone who would give up easily. In the office, Richard indicated that everyone should sit, except William, who remained standing, as if still maintaining his position of authority. "William Pierce," began Richard, his voice calm but loaded with authority. 20 years of service, 2 decades of loyalty, or at least what I believe to be loyalty. The butler remained impassive. "Mr. Richard, I don't understand. If there's any misunderstanding..." "There is. So no misunderstanding whatsoever," cut Richard, walking to his desk. From there, he picked up a tablet and turned it on. "What do you say about this?" On the screen were the images that Ethan had photographed, the employee dossiers, the evidence of blackmail, and the detailed plan to take control of the Blackwood businesses. William's face paled slightly, but his composure remained almost intact. Only a slight tremor in the corner of his mouth betrayed his shock. "This is..." An invasion of privacy, he finally managed to say. Someone entered my private office and, just as you planned to enter Rachel's room to plant my wife's jewelry, interrupted Richard, his voice gaining a dangerous tone. Charlotte, who until then had been observing in silence, stood up. William, I found something interesting this morning. The safe you mentioned, I went to check it even before coming to the kitchen. Do you know what I discovered? That the antique jewelry you said had disappeared was exactly where it had always been, all of it. Mrs. Charlotte, William tried once more. I can explain. Enough explanations, cut Richard. For years I've trusted you not only with the affairs of the house, but also secrets of the family business. And in return, you manipulated employees, forged documents, and planned to take control of everything I've built. William finally abandoned the facade of innocence. His face transformed, revealing a calculating coldness that had always been there, only carefully disguised. You've always been so naive, Richard, he said, using for the first time his employer's name, without the respectful, Mr. Do you think this empire has been maintained because of you? It was I who sacrificed everything, who worked in the shadows while you enjoyed the privileges. You were well paid and respected for your work, retorted Richard. Paid like a servant. The bitterness finally overflowed. 20 years organizing your life, saving your business from disasters. While you and your family lived in opulence, everything I planned was fair, the compensation for decades of dedication. Charlotte approached her husband. How can you speak of justice when you blackmailed employees and planned to frame a single mother for a crime she didn't commit? William turned his icy gaze to Rachel. She and her son ruined everything. Young Ethan never took interest in the family business until she appeared. My plan was perfect. In a year, when Richard retired, I would naturally take control as I planned for 2 decades. Ethan, who remained at Rachel's side, stepped forward. And how did you plan to get rid of me? Did you also have something prepared for me, William? A cold smile crossed the butler's face. You would remove yourself as you always did. Trips, parties, superficial friends, that was your world, until she appeared. He pointed to Rachel with contempt. A simple cook and her bastard son, suddenly more important to the Blackwood heir than his own inheritance. Richard hit the table with his hand, making everyone startle. Enough! Turning to William, he declared, You're fired, William Pierce. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave this house, forever. William let out a bitter laugh. You think you can discard me like this after all I know? The secrets I keep about this family, the skeletons in your closets. I have documents, evidence that will no longer be found, interrupted Ethan with a confident smile. While this meeting was happening, Jack and Mrs. Winters emptied your private office. Your documents are now in our possession. For the E. First time genuine shock crossed William's face. The fortress he had built over 20 years was crumbling before his eyes. This isn't over, he threatened, retreating to the door. No one discards me like a common employee. You will... What, William? Challenged Richard, approaching. Are you going to threaten us? With what? We already have your evidence, your documents, and witnesses of the blackmail you've done for years. If you insist on creating problems, I won't hesitate to take everything to the police. The mention of authorities finally seemed to shake the butler's confidence. He looked around, like a cornered animal seeking an exit. 1 hour, repeated Richard. Not a minute more. When William left, defeated but still emanating an aura of danger, a heavy silence fell over the office. It was Charlotte who finally broke it. Rachel, I want to apologize. I let myself be influenced by William all this time. There's nothing to apologize for, Mrs. Charlotte, replied Rachel, still processing everything she had just witnessed. Richard sat heavily in his chair. Ethan, I thank you for bringing this to my attention. Although I disagree with the methods, I recognize it was necessary. Actually, Ethan hesitated briefly. It was Rachel who alerted us about William's true intentions. Without her, perhaps we would never have discovered in time. Richard looked at the cook with a new perspective. It seems I owe you more than I imagined, Rachel. At that moment, Mrs. Winters and Jack entered the office, carrying a box. We got them, Mr. Richard, announced the elderly housekeeper. All of William's documents are here, and we found this. She removed a small velvet bag from the box. Charlotte approached, immediately recognizing the contents. My antique jewelry. So he had already taken them. They were hidden in a false drawer, explained Jack, ready to be found in Rachel's room. Richard stood up, walking to the office window. Outside, William could be seen crossing the gardens toward the employees' quarters, his rigid posture still trying to maintain dignity amid defeat. Ethan, said Richard without turning, I always believed you had no interest in the family business. Was I wrong? Perhaps you were, Dad, replied Ethan, exchanging a quick glance with Rachel. Perhaps I just needed to find a reason to care. 3 months passed since William Pierce's tempestuous departure from the Blackwood estate. The mansion, which for so many years had been under the rigid and manipulative control of the butler, now breathed a different air, lighter, more human. Like a house that finally rids itself of an oppressive presence, each room seemed brighter, each corridor more welcoming. The Sunday afternoon was particularly pleasant, with the autumn sun bathing the gardens in golden tones. Sitting on one of the benches in the main garden, Noah drew concentrated, his tongue appearing at the corner of his mouth as a sign of artistic effort. At his side, Rachel observed with pride, still adjusting to the new reality that had emerged after the confrontation with William. Look, Mum, I finished, exclaimed the boy, lifting the drawing for her to see. It was a colorful representation of the estate, with all its residents gathered in the garden, Richard and Charlotte smiling, Mrs. Winters with her decorated cane, Jack surrounded by flowers and holding hands Rachel, Noah and Ethan. It's beautiful, my love, praised Rachel, caressing her son's hair. Who are all these people? It's our family now, he replied, with the simplicity and wisdom that only children possess. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. Family, a word that for so long had meant only her and Noah, isolated in their small battle for survival. Now, somehow, unexpectedly, that concept had expanded. What are you appreciating with such enthusiasm? Ethan's voice arrived before he himself did, appearing along the stone path carrying a tray with lemonades. In the last few months, he had gradually assumed more responsibilities in the family business, but always found time to be with Rachel and Noah. Uncle Ethan, look at my drawing of our family. Noah jumped from the bench, running to him. Ethan put down the tray and examined the drawing with genuine attention. This is impressive, Noah. You perfectly captured my mother's forced smile at social gatherings, he joked, making the boy laugh. Sitting beside Rachel, Ethan handed her a glass of lemonade. The simple gesture carried an intimacy that had grown naturally between them, despite their initial attempts to maintain a respectful distance. How was your meeting with the investors? She asked, feeling the freshness of the drink ease the afternoon heat. Surprisingly productive, the Blackwood Foundation for Children's Education project was unanimously approved. His gaze met hers. And the culinary curriculum you developed will be implemented in all partner public schools. Rachel couldn't contain her smile. After William's departure, Richard had made a proposal that changed her life. Besides her work in the Blackwood Estate kitchen, she now coordinated a healthy eating program for underprivileged schools, using her experience to create nutritious and accessible menus. Your father really embraced this project, she commented, still amazed by Richard's transformation. I think he finally realized that the Blackwood legacy can be more than just amassing fortunes. Ethan observed Noah, who was now chasing a butterfly through the garden, and perhaps he also realized that family isn't defined only by blood or tradition. The comment hung between them, loaded with meanings that both still hesitated to express. Completely. In the months after the confrontation with William, their relationship had developed slowly, cautiously, both aware of the social differences and prejudices they would face. The teachers at Westbrook Integrated sent another message, commented Rachel, subtly changing the subject. They said Noah has an exceptional talent for arts. They suggested special classes. That doesn't surprise me, replied Ethan. That drawing he made of my father at the council meeting, with glasses sliding down his nose, a masterpiece of human observation. Both laughed, remembering Richard's astonished expression, upon seeing the precision with which the small artist had portrayed him. The sound of footsteps on the garden stones announced Charlotte Blackwood's approach. In the first days after William's departure, she had maintained a certain distance from Rachel, as if still processing her role in the situation. But gradually something unexpected had happened. A mutual respect had begun to flourish between the two women. "Rachel, Ethan," greeted Charlotte, with her usual elegance, although her countenance was softer than usual. "Isn't Noah with you?" As if invoked by the question, the boy reappeared, running with his hands clasped together. "Mrs. Charlotte, I caught a ladybug. Want to see?" To Rachel's continuous surprise, Charlotte carefully bent down, adjusting her expensive dress to not touch the ground, and examined the small insect in the boy's hands. "How lovely. Did you know that ladybugs bring good luck?" "I'm going to release her on the roses to bring good luck to the garden," decided Noah, moving away again. Charlotte straightened, observing the boy walk away. "He has a gentle heart," she commented, "like his mother." The compliment left Rachel momentarily speechless. Even after months, she was still surprised by these demonstrations of acceptance. "Richard would like to speak with both of you before dinner," continued Charlotte, turning to Ethan and Rachel. In the main office, something in the formality of the request made Rachel feel a pang of apprehension. She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan, who seemed equally intrigued. "Any problem, Mother?" he asked. Charlotte allowed herself a discreet smile. "I wouldn't say it's a problem, just important matters to discuss." When Charlotte moved away, Ethan gently held Rachel's hand. "Don't worry, whatever it is, we'll face it together." On the way to the office, they passed William's old room, now transformed into a space for foundation meetings. Nothing there, reminded of the former butler, as if his presence had been completely erased from the house. In the first days after his departure, there was tension and apprehension. Everyone feared that William would attempt some retaliation, that he would use what he knew against the family. But surprisingly, he had disappeared without a trace, moving to some distant place that no one cared to discover. Mrs. Winters, who now supervised the house with a much more human approach than her predecessor, had a theory. Men like William Pierce feed on power and control. When they lose that, they lose everything. He won't return, not because he fears us, but because he couldn't bear to be seen as the loser in this story. In the office, Richard awaited them, not behind the imposing mahogany desk, but comfortably seated on the leather sofas, with a folder of documents open before him. "Ethan, Rachel, thank you for coming," he greeted, indicating that they should sit. "I have important matters to discuss with you." Richard Blackwood had changed in the last few months. He still maintained the aristocratic posture, the keen gaze of the successful businessman, but something in his rigidity had softened. Perhaps it was the shock of discovering the betrayal of a man he had trusted for decades, or perhaps it was the influence of seeing his son finally finding his place in the world. First, he began the foundation. The board unanimously approved the expansion of the program to all public schools in Westbrook and neighboring towns. Turning to Rachel, he added, "Your work has been exceptional, Rachel. Therefore, I would like to formalize your position as director of the school food program with a contract and salary appropriate to the function." Rachel felt the air escape from her lungs. It was an opportunity she had never imagined. "Mr. Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied, with a rare smile. "Your talent is being wasted only in the kitchen of the estate, as much as we'll miss your dishes." "Of course I accept," she replied, emotional. "Thank you for the trust." Richard nodded, satisfied, before continuing. "Second matter. Ethan, as you know, I'm planning to gradually reduce my active participation in the business. Not a complete retirement, as William expected to exploit, but a gradual transition." He made a significant pause. "I would like you to assume the presidency of the foundation and the management of the family's social investments." Ethan widened his eyes, clearly surprised. "Dad, are you sure? A few months ago, you barely trusted me to attend meetings." "People change, son. I changed. You changed." Richard briefly looked at Rachel before continuing. I learned in the hardest way that decades of loyalty can hide betrayal, and that true character is revealed in adversity. You've demonstrated more maturity and vision in the last few months than I expected to see in years. The moment was significant. A recognition that Ethan had silently sought for years, though he never knew how to achieve it. Rachel discreetly squeezed his hand, feeling the tremor of emotion he was trying to control. I accept, Dad. Thank you for the trust. Richard seemed satisfied, but his countenance indicated there was still more to say. There is a third matter, more personal. He exchanged a look with the two. Charlotte and I aren't blind. We see what's happening between you, even though you try to be discreet. Rachel felt her face burn, while Ethan uncomfortably adjusted himself on the sofa. Dad, Richard raised his hand, interrupting him. No need to explain. As I said, people change. I grew up in an era where certain social conventions were unquestionable. But if there's anything I've learned from this whole situation with William, it's that tradition without humanity is just an empty shell. He closed the document folder, getting up to look out the window. In the garden, visible from that angle, Noah still played, now accompanied by Mrs. Winters, who was showing him different types of flowers. That boy brought life to this house, continued Richard. And you two, he turned to face them. Well, let's say that Charlotte and I have had long conversations about what really matters in the end. Ethan stood up, approaching his father. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying, son, that your happiness matters more than any tradition or social expectation, and if that happiness includes Rachel and Noah. Richard made a vague gesture with his hand, as if the remaining words were unnecessary. The emotion of the moment was almost palpable. Rachel, who had grown up facing prejudices and difficulties as a single mother, had never imagined finding such acceptance, especially from someone like Richard Blackwood. I have one last proposal, continued Richard, returning to the sofa and removing a final document from the folder. The guest house, the one at the back of the property near the lake. It's been empty for years and in need of renovation. I would like to offer it to you, Rachel, and to Noah. It would be more comfortable than the employee accommodations and he hesitated, seeking the word, appropriate for the new position you will occupy in the foundation. Rachel couldn't contain the tears she had been trying to hold back. Mr. Richard, that's very generous, but it's not generosity, he interrupted firmly. It's recognition. You saved this family from a betrayal that could have cost much, more than money or status. You saved my son's future in a way. His eyes, normally cold and calculating, showed genuine emotion. And perhaps you saved me too, from continuing blind to the things that really matter. At that moment, as if responding to a perfect cue, the office door opened and Noah ran in, followed by Charlotte, who was trying, unsuccessfully, to contain his energy. Sorry for the interruption, said Charlotte, but someone here was too anxious to wait. Mom, Mrs. Charlotte showed me the magic flowers in the garden, those that change color with the sun, exclaimed Noah, his eyes shining with excitement. Then, noticing the emotional climate of the room, he suddenly stopped. Are you crying? Did something bad happen? Ethan knelt down to be at the boy's height. No, champion. Actually, only good things. Your mom is going to lead a very important program to help children like you have good food at school, and you're going to have a new house, much bigger and more beautiful, right here on the estate. Noah's eyes widened. Really, we're going to live near the lake? Can I fish there? Every day if you want, replied Richard, surprising everyone with a rare moment of direct interaction with the boy. Noah, with the raw honesty of children, approached Richard. You look less angry now, you know. Before you always looked like you'd eaten a lemon. A moment of tense silence was broken by Richard's unexpected laughter, followed by Charlotte's and finally by everyone in the room. The boy's innocent observation had perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred not just in Richard, but in the entire Blackwood estate. Later, after dinner, Rachel and Ethan walked through the gardens, illuminated only by the full moon and the soft lights that marked the pathways. Noah was already asleep, exhausted after a day of adventures. It still seems like a dream, commented Rachel, looking at the stars. 4 months ago, I was desperate, trying to hide my son in a back room, fearing losing my job at any moment. Ethan intertwined his fingers with hers. Sometimes happy endings come from where we least expect. Do you think William will return someday for revenge? Ethan shook his head. Men like William feed on the fear they provoke in others. Once that power is broken, they lose their very identity. No, he won't return. They reached the lake, where the house that would be Rachel and Noah's new home was reflected in the calm waters. It was a charming colonial-style building, smaller than the main estate but still spacious and elegant. "Remember that enrollment folder for Westbrook Integrated? The one you brought me months ago?" asked Rachel, stopping to admire the view. Of course, why? It was at that moment that I realized what? He encouraged her when she hesitated. That you were different, that you really cared, not just as a kind employer or a friend, but as someone who saw beyond appearances and social positions. She turned to face him. "That's when I began to fall in love with you, although I fought against that feeling with all my strength." Ethan gently touched her face. "And I realized I was in love with you when I saw you confronting my father and William in that kitchen, defending your right to be both a mother and a professional at the same time. So much strength and dignity. How could I not fall in love?" Under the starry sky of Westbrook, with the soft murmur of the waters as a soundtrack, they sealed with a kiss the promise of a future that neither had imagined possible. A future where social barriers, although still existing in the outside world, had been torn down within the walls of the Blackwood estate. In the main house, discreetly observing through the bedroom window, Charlotte joined her husband. "It seems our son has finally found his way," she commented, resting her head on Richard's shoulder. "In a way we never imagined," he agreed. "But perhaps it's exactly what this family needed, someone to remind us that there's more to life than traditions and expectations." Charlotte smiled, thinking of little Noah and how, in just a few months, that child had conquered even her previously reserved heart. "You know what surprises me the most? How something so pure and true was born from such a disturbing situation as William's betrayal." "Perhaps that's how life works," Richard philosophized. "From shadows comes light. From difficulties comes the strength to change." As the couple moved away from the window outside, under the starry sky, Rachel and Ethan continued their walk, now planning not just their individual futures, but a joint future, where the differences that once separated them transformed into the very reasons that united them. And at the center of this new beginning was Noah, the boy whose innocent drawing in the kitchen of the Blackwood estate had, unwittingly, initiated a silent revolution that had forever transformed everyone's life. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Rachel and Ethan at the Blackwood estate has warmed your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions and twists, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the transformative power of love. Find it by clicking on the link to the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the depth of feelings and the unexpected paths that life presents us. Share your opinions in the comments. We'd love to know which moment of Rachel and Ethan's journey touched your heart the most.